My name is Father James Callahan. I'm 55 years old and I've been a priest for nearly 3 decades now. I serve in a parish in Southern California, a community that has grown accustomed to my presence. I'm not the sort of priest that commands much attention, at least not in the way that some do. I don't raise my voice or demand admiration, but I have always prided myself on my ability to connect with the people. I know what they need to hear, how to touch their hearts with words, how to make them feel like they are important, like they matter. For a long time, that was enough for me. In the beginning, I believed I was truly living out my faith, ministering to the poor, offering words of comfort, guiding the lost. There was a time when I was driven by genuine love and service, but somewhere along the way, I began to change. Perhaps it was the prestige, the authority that came with my position, that slowly infected my heart. Perhaps it was the constant flow of admiration from the people. Whatever the cause, I became more and more focused on the power I held, the influence I had over them. It wasn't about helping anymore. It was about my maintaining control, keeping people coming back for more of what I offered, making sure they felt they needed me. I preached about love, didn't I? The kind of love that forgives, that heals, that serves. I made sure they understood that. I made sure to speak about compassion, about giving, about humility. But the truth is, those words were meant for them, not for me. I was too clever for that. I could deliver a sermon on the importance of charity while secretly keeping my hands tightly gripped on my own wealth. I could speak passionately about sacrifice while I built my reputation as a man of status, a figure of power within the church. I knew how to play the game. When I walked down the aisle after the Sunday services, I would greet the parishioners with a warm smile, shaking hands, accepting their gratitude. "Father, that sermon was so beautiful," they would say, and I would nod, my chest swelling with pride. "I'm so glad to be part of this community," they would add. But deep down, I knew the truth. They weren't part of my community. They were part of my kingdom. I had built it, piece by piece, over the years. I was the one they turned to, the one they looked up to, and it felt good. It felt like power. I had reached the pinnacle of my career. At least that's what I told myself. I knew the right people, had access to the right networks, and I was well respected. I wore my collar like a crown, knowing it opened doors that others couldn't get through. People looked up to me. They trusted me. I had mastered the art of leading with just enough kindness and enough firmness to ensure that no one ever questioned my authority. I even began to indulge in luxuries, buying expensive clothes, and enjoying comforts that didn't match the lifestyle of a humble servant of God. But it didn't matter. No one questioned it. After all, I was the priest. Who could question a priest? It was on a Sunday evening, after one of my most powerful sermons about love and sacrifice, that I first felt it. As I drove home from the church, the sun sinking low in the sky, I reflected on the words I had just shared with my congregation. I told them that the greatest commandment was to love one another as Christ loved us. I spoke of the need to serve, to care for the poor, to care for the sick, to reach out in love. It was a beautiful message, wasn't it? I told them that the world would be a better place if we all simply followed these teachings. And yet, as I drove down the empty roads, I felt an unsettling pang in my chest. It was sharp, sudden, and undeniable. I winced, thinking it was just the stress of a long day catching up with me. I'd been feeling this way for a while, a sort of heaviness in my chest, a pressure that never seemed to go away. But this time was different. The pain was more intense, like a vice slowly tightening around my heart. I tried to dismiss it, to convince myself it was nothing serious. I kept my hands on the wheel, my knuckles turning white. "It's nothing," I muttered to myself. "Just need to relax, just need to breathe." But the pain didn't go away. If anything, it seemed to intensify. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead, my heart racing. Still, I kept driving. I wasn't about to let a little discomfort get in the way of my image. I thought of my parishioners, their smiles, their gratitude. I thought of the influence I had, the respect they showed me. I thought of how I had built this life, this empire of power and reverence. But now, in the face of this pain, it all felt distant, insignificant. The pressure in my chest was unbearable. I knew what it was. It was a heart attack. I had read about it, heard stories of people who felt that crushing sensation before it was too late. and I knew that I was no different from them. It was happening, but I wasn't ready for it. I wasn't ready to face the consequences of my life, the choices I'd made. The road ahead seemed to blur, the lights fading in and out. My vision began to narrow, and for a brief moment, I thought I might lose control of the car. But then, I felt something strange, something almost like a pull, like a force beyond my control, guiding me somewhere. It wasn't fear, though. There was no panic in me. I wasn't scared. In fact, I felt strangely at peace. I tried to remember what I was supposed to do in this situation. Call 911, I thought, but my hands wouldn't move. The car swerved a little, and then before I could even comprehend what was happening, my heart stopped. And in that moment, something happened. I didn't die the way I thought I would. Instead, I felt free. I was no longer in my body. The pain was gone. The weight I had carried for so long, the burden of my pride and selfishness, was lifted. It was like a veil had been pulled away, and for the first time in years, I could breathe. I could see clearly, as if I had been walking through a fog for so long and was finally able to step into the light. I was no longer bound to the world, no longer controlled by it. I was free. As my heart ceased its relentless beat, there was no dramatic flash, no bright light that suddenly pulled me away. Instead, it was subtle, like a slow exhale, the kind of release you experience when you let go of something heavy after holding it for far too long. I wasn't afraid. There was no anxiety, no terror that gripped my chest as my body lay still and lifeless. Instead, I felt calm. I felt peaceful, almost weightless. It was like a gentle shift, a quiet transition from the tangible, physical world to something far beyond it. I had always believed in the afterlife, of course. I had spent years preaching about it, guiding my parishioners through the concepts of heaven, hell, and eternal life. But now, in this moment, I was experiencing it, and I realized that all the doctrines I had recited, all the passages I had quoted, couldn't begin to explain what I was feeling. I felt myself rising above my body like a balloon detached from the earth, slowly drifting upwards. There was no pain, no dizziness, just a sense of detachment, a sense of leaving behind the burdens of my existence. I watched as my body remained slumped in the car, blood staining the fabric of the seat, the vehicle swerving ever so slightly as if it too were mourning my loss. From above, everything seemed distant, as if I was seeing the world through a foggy window. I could still see the car, but I was no longer inside it. I wasn't trapped by its confines or limited by the weight of my own flesh. I could sense the world below, but it felt so far away, so irrelevant to me now. The panic I had expected to feel at the thought of leaving my life behind never came. Instead, there was nothing but an overwhelming sense of peace. The chaos of my life, the people I had manipulated, the secrets I had kept, all faded into the background. In fact, they seemed almost unimportant now. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to control anything. I wasn't in charge. I wasn't the one everyone turned to. I was free. I looked down at my body one last time, the priest I had been, the man who had preached of sacrifice while living in excess, who had spoken of love while secretly seeking power. He lay motionless, his life extinguished. But it wasn't me anymore. That body, those actions, that facade, they no longer had a hold on me. The world around me grew brighter. A light, soft yet overwhelming, began to pull me, and I felt myself floating toward it. There was no fear, no hesitation. I was drawn to it, like a moth to a flame. But it wasn't the kind of flame that burned. It was warmth, a welcoming light that wrapped itself around me, beckoning me forward. I felt no need to resist. I wanted to move closer, to see where it would take me. As I neared the light, I became aware of a presence. It wasn't one I could see, but I could feel it surrounding me, enveloping me like a blanket of comfort. There was no voice, no sound at all, but there was a profound sense of being understood. There was a knowing, as if all my actions, all my choices, all my selfishness and pride had been seen, not in judgment, but in understanding. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I was not alone. This presence was like a gentle hand guiding me, and I allowed myself to be led, trusting in the peace that had washed over me. The physical world, the one I had once clung to with such fervor, seemed to grow dimmer, less significant. And then suddenly I felt an overwhelming pull. A sense of urgency washed over me. It wasn't fear, but a deep yearning, a tug that called me to something I wasn't yet ready to see. I wanted to stay in this peaceful place, to remain in this calm serenity, but I could feel that it was not yet my time. There was something more that needed to happen, something I had yet to understand. I could feel myself being pulled back. My body was distant now, but I could sense that it was still there, still waiting for me to return. This pull wasn't painful, but it was undeniable, like a rope tethering me to a life I had just left behind. And just as suddenly as I had been drawn toward the light, I felt the sensation of falling. The peace, the serenity, the light. It all started to fade, and the world I had left behind slowly began to creep back into my awareness. I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to return to that life, that world. But it was as if the decision had already been made. My body, that frail, broken thing that I had spent so many years manipulating, was calling me back. It was then that I knew this wasn't the end. I don't know how long I had been floating in that strange space, neither here nor there, when the light grew more intense. The peace that had wrapped itself around me suddenly gave way to a figure emerging from the brilliance. It wasn't an overwhelming, terrifying sight like I had imagined. No, this figure radiated a calmness and warmth that flooded my being, replacing any lingering doubts or fears. At first, I could not make out the details, but then the light shifted just enough for me to see him clearly. He was standing before me, not in a cloud of smoke or some grand display of divine power, but simply standing there, waiting. His eyes, the same eyes I had read about in the Bible so many times, were full of compassion. They weren't cold, judging eyes. They weren't angry or distant. They were full of love, a kind of love I had only ever preached about but never truly understood. I didn't know what to do. How could I stand in the presence of someone who had seen through me, someone who had known every dark corner of my soul, every false word, every selfish action? How could I face the one who had given his life for the very things I had abused for my own gain? I wanted to fall to my knees, but before I could, he spoke. His voice was gentle, calm, like the sound of a quiet stream, but it held a depth I cannot begin to describe. It was a voice that echoed through my entire being, speaking to parts of me I had long buried, but it wasn't condemning. It wasn't accusing. It was simply truth. "Why are you here, my beloved child?" The words pierced through me, and I felt a wave of guilt crash over me. I didn't respond immediately. I couldn't. I had spent so many years standing behind that pulpit, calling others to repentance, to love, to faith, and yet here I was, standing before the very embodiment of love, of compassion, and I had nothing to offer but my failure. My actions had been all about control, about using God's name to prop up my own desires and power. I have failed you," I whispered, barely able to speak, my heart heavy with shame. His eyes softened, and he stepped closer, not with anger, but with a profound sadness that made my chest tighten. I had failed him. I had preached about love and compassion, but I had lived in a way that was the complete opposite. I had manipulated, controlled, and used my position as a priest to build my own kingdom. I had walked the path of pride, not service. "You have," he said gently, his voice filled with sorrow, not condemnation. "You have used my name for your own gain. You have built your life on falsehoods, on pride, and in doing so, you have harmed many." I bowed my head, unable to look him in the eye. The weight of my actions, the countless times I had twisted scripture to suit my desires, the moments I had looked at my congregation as pawns in my game of power, it all came flooding back. And yet, despite everything I had done, there was no anger in his eyes, no rejection. Instead, he spoke again, and his words held a depth that reached into my very soul. "But I love you," he said. "You are my child, and it is not too late. But first you must see the truth of what you've done and what you've become." His words stung, yes, but they also pierced through the lies I had told myself for years. I had spent so much of my life hiding behind a mask, pretending to be a servant of God, when all along I had been serving myself. I had convinced myself that my way was the right way, that I was a leader, a guide to those who sought the truth. But I had only been leading them further from the path of Christ, not closer to it. As I stood there before him, there was no shame in his gaze. There was only love, an unconditional love that called me back to himself, a love that said, "You can still change. You can still be who you were meant to be." "I am sorry," I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of it all. "I am so sorry. I have betrayed everything you stand for." Jesus nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. Repentance is the first step, he said, his voice calm yet firm. And then you must make it right. You have been given much, my child, but to whom much is given, much is required. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed. I had been given so much, this position, this platform, the trust of so many, and I had squandered it. I had used the authority God had granted me to manipulate, control, and maintain power, instead of serving with humility. I had twisted the teachings of Christ to suit my ego, my desire for control, my need to be admired. And for that, I felt the weight of conviction in every fiber of my being. I could feel my heart breaking. Not just for the sins I had committed, but for the people I had hurt along the way. The families I had ignored, the ones who had trusted me only to be let down by my hypocrisy. I had been called to serve, but I had chosen to be served. And now here I was, standing before the very one I had preached about but never truly followed. I could feel the gulf between the man I had become and the man Christ had called me to be, and it was as if the distance between us was insurmountable. But then Jesus spoke again, and his words filled me with something I had never known: hope. There is no sin too great that it cannot be forgiven, he said softly, yet powerfully. Your journey is not over. You must return, my beloved child. Go back and teach others the way of true servant leadership. Show them what it means to love, to serve with humility, and to lead with a heart full of compassion. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe. The burden of my past sins, the weight of my failures began to lift. There was still so much work to do, but in that moment, I knew that Jesus had not come to condemn me. He had come to call me back, to show me that redemption was still possible. Will you return? He asked, his voice gentle but firm. Will you lead my people, not with the pride of the world, but with the heart of a servant? I knelt before him, my tears flowing freely now, as the weight of his love and mercy overwhelmed me. I had spent so many years building my own kingdom, but now in his presence I realized I had been building nothing at all. My life had been a house of cards, fragile and hollow, and Jesus was calling me to build something real, something eternal. I will return, I whispered. I will return and I will serve. I will lead with love as you have shown me. And as I spoke those words, something inside me shifted. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of purpose, a sense of peace. It was as if the very foundation of my being had been rebuilt from the ground up. I was no longer the man I had been. I was being transformed, and it was only the beginning. In the moments after I pledged to return, something in the atmosphere shifted. It was as if the very air around me hummed with a new energy. The brilliant light surrounding Jesus began to fade into a soft golden glow, and as it did, my surroundings transformed. The peaceful landscape before me grew clearer. I was no longer suspended in an endless, infinite space, but standing on what seemed to be a lush green field. The air was fresh, and the sound of gentle winds and birds chirping filled the silence. There was no pain here, no sorrow, only tranquility. Then I began to see the vision unfold before me. The scene started with a figure, a man in the distance. He was dressed simply, in clothes that seemed to be made of natural materials, not of anything extravagant. His face was calm, serene, and even though I could not see him clearly at first, I knew who it was. It was Christ, the embodiment of humility and selfless love. As I watched, he moved through the people around him, not with grandeur or the authority I had so often thought of when imagining a leader. No, he walked among them with gentleness. He touched the sick, healed the broken, and spoke to the lost, not with condemnation, but with understanding, compassion, and a deep, unwavering love. The crowds that gathered around him did not look to him in awe as they would a king or ruler. No, they looked to him as someone who truly cared for their well-being, someone who saw them, not as subjects, but as brothers and sisters. This was not the leadership I had known. This was not the power I had spent my life coveting. This was something different, something far more profound. It was a leadership that came not from control, not from power, but from a deep inner humility. Jesus wasn't seeking admiration. He wasn't seeking to be elevated. He simply sought to serve. I watched as he bent down to wash the feet of his disciples. And in that moment, I saw the fullness of true leadership. It wasn't about status or position. It wasn't about public acclaim or recognition. It was about serving others, humbling oneself to the lowest of positions, washing feet, tending to needs, and offering love, not to earn anything, but because it was the right thing to do. "Do you see?" came the voice of Jesus, soft and powerful, as if it echoed from every direction, and yet only directly to me. I nodded, though the tears had begun to fill my eyes. I saw it. I finally saw it. The depth of what true leadership meant. And in that moment, I realized how far I had strayed from this path, how many people I had failed to serve in the way He had called me to. I had spent so many years focused on power, on building my own reputation, creating an image of importance, when what I should have been doing was humbling myself. I had become the very thing I had preached against, the one who sought to control, to dominate, to be admired. But now I saw for the first time what it truly meant to lead. Jesus turned and began walking away, not to a throne, not to a place of honor, but to a small group of people gathered by the river, and as He moved, He continued to teach. The people listened to His words, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. He led them with His actions, teaching them that real leadership is about laying down one's life for others. It's about sacrifice. It's about going to the lowest places to lift others up. I saw the faces of those He helped. They were not the wealthy, the influential, the ones with power. They were the poor, the sick, the forgotten, the outcasts. He didn't see them as lesser. He didn't see them as undeserving. No, He saw them as beloved children of God, worthy of compassion, worthy of care. In that moment, I realized the heart of Christ's leadership was rooted in selflessness. True servant leadership wasn't about advancing one's own agenda or holding on to power. It was about laying down that power for the sake of others. It wasn't about building an empire or a reputation. It was about building a community where love, compassion, and service were the foundation of everything. It was at that point that I understood. I had spent so many years in the church, preaching about faith, about love, about service, and yet I had missed the most important part. I had not lived it. I had failed to serve others, to lead by example. Instead, I had sought to be admired, to be placed on a pedestal, to control those around me. I had mistaken my title for my calling, but now I could see clearly. True leadership wasn't about being the one with the loudest voice. It wasn't about holding the highest position or commanding the most respect. It was about humbling oneself to serve, to care for others, to lead with love, not dominance. I wanted this. I wanted to be that leader, not the one who sought to control or manipulate, but the one who humbly served. I could feel a desire stirring within me, a burning passion to change, to return to the true calling of my life, to lead not from a place of ego, but from a heart full of love and humility. But there was more. As the vision of Christ continued, something else began to unfold. A world came into view, a world that I had long avoided seeing, a world I had been too self-absorbed to recognize. As I looked closer, I saw the devastation caused by false leadership. Leaders who had claimed the mantle of faith but used it to exploit, to manipulate, and to control. I saw the churches, once full of love and light, now crumbling under the weight of greed, of self-interest. I saw the brokenness of communities torn apart by selfish leaders who had twisted the teachings of Christ to their own advantage. I saw wars, division, hatred, all of it stemming from the failure of leaders to follow Christ's example. It was heartbreaking. But Jesus didn't just show me the brokenness, He showed me hope. He showed me that despite the darkness, there was still a way forward, a way to restore the church, to restore true leadership, a way to rebuild the community of faith, not through power or control, but through humility, love, and service. "You must return, my child," Jesus spoke softly, His voice full of urgency. "The world is waiting for true leaders to rise up. It is not too late. You must lead them back to the heart of the gospel." I nodded, feeling the weight of His words in my soul. For the first time in years, I understood. I understood that my life had purpose again. It wasn't to build my own empire. It was to build the kingdom of God, to serve, to heal, to lead with love. I was ready. The moment Jesus' voice faded from my consciousness, I found myself drifting once again. But this time, I wasn't alone. There was a new presence that entered this space, as if the very fabric of reality shifted to accommodate something much darker. A profound sense of sorrow filled the air, and I could feel the weight of it pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. I was no longer standing in the peaceful, serene landscape where I had just witnessed the essence of true leadership. Instead, I was pulled toward something much more chaotic, something I couldn't yet comprehend. There was an unsettling energy surrounding me, and I felt an inexplicable urge to look. It was then that the vision shifted again, and I saw the world below me, but this time it was not bathed in light, not full of hope, but marred by devastation. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and I was suddenly shown the true effects of leadership that was built on self-interest and manipulation. I saw the world as it truly was, a world in crisis, broken by those who claimed to serve others, but only served themselves. My heart clenched as I watched. I saw the church, the institution that I had devoted my life to, distorted into something unrecognizable. The halls that should have been filled with love, unity, and grace were now echoing with the sounds of betrayal, greed, and corruption. I saw leaders, people who were once trusted to guide others toward God's truth, using their power to manipulate the faithful, using faith as a means of control, not as a way of serving. I saw the walls of churches adorned with wealth, golden altars, luxurious robes, expensive jewels, while the poor and the suffering outside were neglected, forgotten, and ignored. The very essence of what it meant to be a servant of Christ was being trampled upon. Leaders were cloaking themselves in robes of righteousness while their hearts were far from the gospel. The pain in my chest grew heavier, the weight of all the suffering I witnessed settling deep within my soul. It was as if I could feel the cries of the lost, the brokenhearted, and the neglected. These people, they had trusted us, the leaders. They had trusted me. And what had we given them? What had I given them? I saw faces. Faces of the faithful who had once sat in my pews, eyes filled with hope and yearning for truth. Their trust had been betrayed, their faith twisted into something toxic, their love exploited for the benefit of those who should have been serving them. I saw families torn apart, communities fragmented, hearts shattered, all because of leaders who had used their positions for personal gain. All because of leaders like me who had taken the sacred trust given to them and used it to build their own empires. I felt my heart break as I saw the wars that raged across nations, divisions between races, between families, between believers. How had we come to this? How had the very teachings of Christ, which were meant to unite, become the very thing that divided? And then in the midst of the chaos, the vision grew even darker. I saw the suffering of the world. The faces of children starving, the homeless living in the streets, refugees fleeing from wars that never seemed to end. I saw the brokenness of humanity, people crying out for help, for compassion, for love, but finding none. I saw how the false teachings of power and manipulation had led the world down this path of despair. I began to understand. The brokenness of the world wasn't just a result of war or poverty or injustice. It was a result of false leadership. It was the outcome of leaders who had used their position to control, to exploit, and to take for themselves rather than to serve, to heal, and to give. And I know we had contributed to this. My own actions, my own words, though not as extreme as the violence and suffering I now saw, had still played a role in perpetuating this system. My desire for status, for power, for recognition had fed into a larger system of manipulation. I had preached one thing: love, compassion, service, but lived another. I had given my followers the impression that leadership in the faith was about prestige and control. I had failed them. I could feel the depth of my own guilt, the weight of my years of deceit. But even more than that, I felt the sorrow of those who had been misled. They had trusted me, and I had not led them to Christ, but to my own desires. The vision shifted again, and I saw the people, the masses who had been affected by this false leadership. There were those whose eyes were dull, lacking hope. There were the disillusioned, those who had once believed but had grown bitter because all they had seen were the failures of their leaders. I saw the tears of mothers, the despair of fathers. I saw communities torn apart, not by external forces, but by the corruption within the heart of the church. And I saw the greatest tragedy of all, the absence of love. The very thing that Christ had come to give, the very essence of his ministry, had been lost. And in its place was pride. There was the pride of those who believed they were entitled to their position. There was the pride of those who thought themselves above others, who wielded power as a weapon. but I also saw the hope. Despite the brokenness, there was still a spark of light, a thread of hope weaving through the darkness. There were still those who remained faithful, who refused to give up on the true teachings of Christ. They had not been led astray, and they continued to seek the light, even in the midst of the darkness. And it was to them that Christ had called me back, to those who still believed, to those who still hoped, to those who still sought to serve. I was filled with sorrow, yes, but I was also filled with a sense of urgency. I understood now. The world was not lost, the church was not beyond redemption, but the leaders, we had to change. We had to return to the heart of what it meant to serve. As I watched the devastation, the brokenness, the corruption, the despair, I heard a voice, Jesus' voice. It was soft, but it rang through the darkness with an undeniable authority. "You must return, my child," he said, his voice full of urgency. "You have seen the damage. You have seen the brokenness. The world is crying out for true leaders, leaders who will love, who will serve, who will lead with humility and grace. You must go back and lead them back to me." The voice was not angry, it was not condemning, it was not filled with judgment, it was filled with love, deep, compassionate love. And in that love, I felt the weight of his call. It wasn't too late. The world could still be healed, the church could still be restored, but only if I returned, only if I led with humility, with love, and with a servant's heart. I nodded. I understood now. The time had come to return, and this time I would lead differently. I would lead with the heart of a servant. The moment the vision of Earth's brokenness began to dissolve, the weight that had settled deep within me started to lift. But there was still a lingering urgency in the air, a powerful sense that something crucial was unfolding. The clarity of the vision remained, but the sadness I had felt began to shift, replaced by something different, something I could not quite explain. It was a stirring deep within my soul, as if I had been given a second chance, a calling to something greater. And then in the distance, I saw him again. A presence of unimaginable brilliance began to take shape. Familiar, but this time even more intense, more overwhelming. It was as if the light that had shone upon me earlier had now taken physical form. And standing in the midst of that light was Jesus, no longer just a distant figure, but now standing in front of me, gazing at me with eyes full of compassion and sorrow. There were no words at first, just a deep, knowing silence between us. But as I gazed into his eyes, I felt as though he could see into the very depths of my heart, into the layers of my soul that I had long buried, hidden even from myself. There was no condemnation in his gaze, no judgment, only an intense understanding. "You have seen the truth, my child," he said, his voice soft but undeniably filled with the weight of eternal wisdom. "You have seen the damage, the suffering that false leadership has caused, and you have seen how it all began, how your own choices have contributed to the pain. But I tell you now, there is hope. There is always hope." I wanted to speak, to explain myself, to say something, anything, but no words would come. I was overwhelmed, overcome by the flood of emotions, of regrets, and yet at the same time an overwhelming sense of peace, that this moment, this confrontation, was not meant to condemn me, but to call me higher, to lead me back to the truth. Jesus stepped closer, and as he did, I felt an invisible weight on my shoulders, something heavy, something I had been carrying for far too long. It was as though every step he took was also lifting a burden off of me, not only from my physical body, but from my very soul. I could feel the shame and the guilt lifting, though they still clung to me like stubborn shadows, whispering words of condemnation. "You have lived for power, for control," he continued, his words cutting through me like a sword. "You have preached of love, but you have not lived it. You have preached of compassion, but you have not practiced it. You have used my name, my position, as a tool to build your own kingdom." His words were not harsh, they were not angry. They were filled with the sorrow of someone who had hoped for so much more from his servant. But there was no condemnation, only a deep, gentle longing for me to see the truth. I dropped to my knees, my heart breaking as the full weight of my actions and inactions sank in. For the first time, I was forced to look at myself through the eyes of the one I had claimed to serve. And it hurt. It hurt more than any physical pain I had ever known. But there was more. As I knelt before him, I felt something rise within me, not just guilt or sorrow, but a deep desire for redemption. I I knew that my sin, my failures, were not the end of the story. I knew that what I had seen, what I had witnessed in the vision, was not the final word. There was still time. Time to change, time to restore, time to return to the heart of Christ's message. I have shown you the pain of the world, Jesus said, his voice filled with urgency, and I have shown you the brokenness of my church, but I have also shown you the way of humility, the way of love, the way of service. You must go back, my child, and lead others as I have led. At those words, I felt the weight of responsibility settle upon me once again. It was not a burden of guilt, but a burden of love, a calling to do more than I had ever done before. Jesus was asking me to change, not only for myself, but for those I had misled. I had failed them, but I could help heal them, help restore them to the truth of who they were meant to be in Christ. I cannot do it alone, I whispered, the words slipping from my lips before I even realized I had spoken them. No, Jesus replied, his voice as gentle as the breeze, but filled with unshakable strength. You cannot, but you do not walk alone. I will be with you. I will guide you. And you must trust that in your humility, I will do the work through you. But you must be willing to lay down your pride, your position, your need for control. I nodded slowly, though I still did not fully understand what this meant, what this would require of me. How could I return to earth and serve in the way Jesus was asking? How could I undo the years of damage, the years of deception? Could I ever truly lead with love, with humility? Would the people believe me? You must not worry about the outcome, Jesus said, as though reading my mind. You must only follow me, serve with the heart of a true servant. Guide others with love, compassion, and humility. Do not be afraid to admit your failures, for in your brokenness my light will shine brightest. And in that moment I knew that this was my calling. My mission was no longer about prestige, power, or control. It was about love. It was about leading by serving, and in that I would find true greatness. Jesus extended his hand to me, and as I took it, I felt a rush of peace flood over me, a peace that washed away the last remnants of doubt and fear. You must return now, my child, he said gently, but with a sense of urgency that I could not ignore. The world is broken. It is time for you to heal it, but you must return to me, to true leadership, to true faith. I felt the pull of the world, the pull of my body. It was time. I didn't fully understand how it would all unfold, how my brokenness could be healed as heck, or how I could lead others in the way that Jesus had led me. But I knew that I would try. I would go back, and I would do everything in my power to make things right. And I knew deep down that Christ would walk with me every step of the way. I don't know how long I was gone. It felt like a moment, and yet it also felt like an eternity. But the world I knew, the world I had once thought I controlled, was gone. I was no longer tethered to the physical life I had lived. It was a strange sensation, as if I had been floating in some space between realms, not truly dead, but not alive in the way I had known before. And then, suddenly, I was back. I could feel my body again, the pressure of the bed beneath me, the cold air on my skin. My eyes fluttered open to a stark, sterile hospital room, the harsh lights above flickering faintly. I was aware of the doctors and paramedics around me, their faces a blur of concern and astonishment. I could hear their voices, their frantic chatter, as they attempted to understand how I had survived. One of them, a nurse, was frantically pressing on my chest, while another hooked up electrodes to my body. But none of it mattered to me in that moment. I felt alive. Yes, physically alive, but also spiritually renewed. I had returned, but not as the man I was before. I tried to sit up, but my body was weak, drained, as if I had been pulled through an immense physical and spiritual struggle. My chest still ached, the remnants of the heart attack lingering like an old wound. Yet, despite the physical pain, I was filled with a strange, profound peace. It was as if the burden I had carried for so long had been lifted, and in its place was a clear, unwavering sense of purpose. "Father, are you all right?" a voice asked, sharp and full of concern. I turned my head slowly to see the familiar face of one of my parishioners, a woman named Clara who had always been kind but distant. She was standing beside my bed, her eyes wide, almost fearful. I could see that she was trying to understand what had happened, trying to process the fact that I had survived a heart attack, and more so, that I had returned from death itself. I'm fine, I whispered hoarsely, my voice unfamiliar to my ears. I'm fine, but I need to speak with you. All of you." The room fell silent, the doctors momentarily pausing in their efforts to stabilize me as Clara's face shifted from worry to confusion. They, too, must have sensed something was different in the air. Something had changed in me. "Father, you," Clara began, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I need you to listen to me," I interrupted, my voice now gaining strength. "I've seen things. I've been given a mission." I paused, trying to steady myself. I have been shown the truth of what I've been doing with my life, what we've all been doing, and I have been given a second chance to make it right. The room felt still, as if time itself had stopped to absorb the weight of my words. Clara's eyes searched mine, and I could see the faint trace of disbelief in her expression, but also something else, something softer, more tentative. "I know you've heard my sermons before. I know you've heard me speak of love and faith," I continued, feeling a new clarity settle over me. "But I have failed you. I have failed God. I have preached about things I did not fully understand. I have used my position not to serve, but to control, and that must change." The nurse who had been checking my vitals looked at the doctor, who nodded curtly, signaling for the others to give us a moment. But I barely noticed their movements, my focus now entirely on Clara and on the others who had begun to trickle into the room, hearing the commotion and the quiet urgency in my voice. "I want to apologize to you all," I said, my voice breaking slightly, the weight of my own confession nearly overwhelming. "I have lived for my own glory, my own ego. But now I see the truth. Jesus showed me the way. He showed me how far I had fallen." There was a pause, a long silence in the room. Then, slowly, Clara approached me. Her eyes were filled with emotion, and I could sense a depth of understanding in her gaze that I had never seen before. "Father, we didn't know," she whispered. "We didn't know how much you were carrying, how much pain you were in." I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. How could I explain to them the depth of my failure? How could I explain the weight of the truth that had been laid before me? "I was so focused on building my own kingdom," I said softly, "but I never understood that the kingdom of God isn't built through power or control. It's built through love, through service, through humility. I've preached about Jesus, but I've not lived like Jesus. I've not served like Jesus." Tears welled up in my eyes, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to hide them. I had spent so much of my life hiding behind a mask, pretending to be something I wasn't, pretending to be a leader when I was truly a broken man in need of redemption. But now here I was, facing the truth of my own failures, and I felt a peace in that. "I am asking for your forgiveness," I continued, my voice thick with emotion. "But more than that, I am asking you to join me in the mission that Jesus has given me. We are called to love, to serve, to lead, not from the top down, but from the bottom up. We are called to serve with humility, with grace, and with a true heart for God." The room fell quiet again, but this time it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was a silence filled with the possibility of something new, something beautiful. I could see the change beginning to take root in the faces around me. They were listening, truly listening, in a way they never had before. I turned to the window, and for the first time in a long while, I felt hope rise in my heart. The sky outside was clear, the sun beginning to set in the distance, casting a golden hue over the world. It was as if the very earth itself was waiting for the change that was about to unfold. "I don't know how to do this," I said, my voice soft but steady. "I don't know how to undo the damage I've done, how to heal the wounds I've inflicted, but I do know this. I am committed. I am committed to following Christ's example. I am committed to leading with love, with service, and with humility. And I will spend the rest of my life making things right." And with that, I knew that the journey had only just begun. The road ahead would not be easy, and the scars of the past would not simply vanish. But I had been given a second chance, a chance to make things right, to rebuild, and to lead as Christ had led. The world needed true leaders, leaders who served, leaders who loved, leaders who followed the example of the one who came not to be served, but to serve. And now it was my turn to lead that way, to lead with humility, to lead with love, and to lead with the heart of a true servant. I had been lost, but now I was found. And with Christ's help, I would restore true faith to the world, one step at a time.